once you sign a contract with a traditional publisher, often, not all cases, but often, the control over that project is suddenly ceded to the person who has made essentially a bet on your book.
Today's conversation is everything self-publishing. I'm so excited to be joined by Chris Wold. Chris Wold is the Sales and Business Development Director at whitefox Publishing. And whitefox is a creative agency designed to innovate the delivery of publishing services. Chris has got some background here. He's held senior roles in both the States and also here in the UK with Tuttle Publishing, Red Wheel, Wiser, HarperCollins and Watkins Media. Chris, thank you so much for giving me some of your time today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So I want to start, Chris, with an interesting stat that came to me through the Writers and Artists Yearbook. And the stat says that 43% of self-published writers said that they chose that path because they firstly wanted to publish the book as soon as it was ready and they wanted to have more control over the process. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about why self-publishing might be a more favourable option for that element of timing and control over that creative project.
This comes up very, very often with our inquiries. So if you, as an author, have been working on a book for months, sometimes years, to find yourself in a position where you feel, I'm ready to publish this book, and then to discover that it will take you, should you have a contract from a traditional publisher, maybe 9, 16 months to have it published, much less the whole pitching process that could take for who knows long in that point. It can be quite, both surprising, a little deflating, sometimes a bit frustrating. So that's often a point where a lot of people say, well, I realize in this day and age of technology that there are other options. And this is where the exploration of a lot of self-publishing interest comes to us from. The other side would be that perhaps somebody has gone through that process, developed a great idea, they feel it's strong, they've put it out to publishers who seem to be taking their own sweet time to make a decision on things and really want to push it out to a market that they feel they can reach. In that aspect, we offer that control to do that. I guess the other side of this also is a realization at some point for many authors that both for timing and control, should you go down a traditional route, it's not very overt, but it can certainly become clear after the fact that once you sign a contract with a traditional publisher, often, not all cases, but often, the control over that project is suddenly ceded to the person who has made essentially a bet on your book. And you are given options to input, but you do not actually have a final say. And for many of our authors, they really want to have that final call on what their book, their baby, is going to be like. I guess the last aspect I would highlight about this would be that we talk about self-publishing, and it's become less of a dirty word than it used to be. There's been a big transition in the last few years to be seen as being entrepreneurial in going down this route. That it is one that shows that you are in control, you are driving the project, you have the vision for it, and that's quite empowering, I think, for a lot of authors. And for those who are prepared to do so, I think it is powerful.
I love this idea of the empowering, that route of the entrepreneurship.
There are many, many good reasons to go traditional. And, some it's financial, some it is kudos. Sometimes it's the size of the opportunity that might be there for an author. And that should be respected and seen as such. But for the vast majority of the other authors out there, and traditional publishers really make all their money off of a very thin slice of their list at the very top. that is the benefit they have from having this big machine and the volume around it. But for a self-publisher, it's a one-to-one scenario. This is one book, you're publishing it in one way, and you want it to be very curated and boutique and seen in its for all its good and bad, and really addressed clearly as an individual thing, as opposed to something that's in the basket that is our publishing program for spring 2022.
And also what came to me when you talked about that very thin slice, because I know that there are certainly a lot of writers in my audience who say that they want an agent and they want to go down the traditional publishing route because they don't know how to market their book, and they have this sense of like, oh, someone's going to take it and they're going to market it for me. But of course, if you're not in that thin slice, you don't get marketed in the same way as the people in that thin slice.
I think that's very true, and I think this is also one of probably the hard truths about publishing in all its forms, is that it's not democratic. It is quite rough and ready. A traditional publisher will look at it from very commercial terms in where do we want to put our funding, and oftentimes. And I know there's a lot of blowback about this, but I think they can be used in a very positive way for self-publishers, is that it falls back upon the author. That's quite daunting for a lot of people, because if you're a new author who hasn't done this before, I mean, that is really hard. Luckily, there are a lot of resources out there online for free or through paid services to help you to reach those sort of equivalent levels that you might be getting or not getting, even with some traditional publishers. This sort of skill base and expertise that you need to market your book well. But it probably is one of those scenarios where a couple of steps back as a self-publisher, one would have wanted to have identified a lot of these issues before going down the route. And I know perhaps we'll talk about maybe missteps that can happen with self-publishing. And I think this is really a really key area.
Let's talk about some of those mistakes or those missteps that you said that a young or inexperienced writer might make when it comes to self-publishing. There's
a small handful of things we seem to come across very often. One is that there's an assumption that and this is quite perhaps many decades old now, assumption that if I publish it, they will come idea of, if I make a book, it will be found because it is a book in a shop, on a site, that sort of thing. That's been not the case for many, many, many years now. So being aware of the need to be able to market and publicize a book is one side of that, but also to know to whom you're writing this for and will they buy it. We see a lot of very well-intentioned, very nice people who have had great encouragement, perhaps from friends and family, but haven't stretched out their network to explore who's actually going to buy this book wider than that, which can give you a false sense of its marketability, its commercial sense, that sort of things. And this is, as a service provider, I have to sort of asterisk this one, but one of the things that we sometimes see is that, authors who say, I can solve that service for myself. And I think, be it editorial or marketing assessment or whatever it might be, and I think that especially for the self-publisher, the value that you have access to now to professional editorial assessment or services out there is really something to consider and not to dismiss, because it is often the real marker between a book feeling very, and I'll use the dirty word, self-published, versus professionally done.
Yeah.
And the last one oftentimes is really one that's nuts and bolts. It's about having a sense of what it costs. So what are the costs involved with different routes, be it traditional publishing going to be distributed into a bookshop versus print on demand and ebook, and what kind of, the really basic stuff of building a P&L. And this can sometimes be quite both daunting and disheartening if you haven't done all these other things about finding a market, understanding who's going to buy it, that side of things. But it's very necessary.
What comes to me actually when you're talking about understanding the market is, again, and I see this with people who are wanting to go the agent route, is they're hoping that the agent's going to tell them that, but that's even something that you need to know before going to the agent submission process. It's often why people don't get picked up, because the agent can see, well, I don't know who the market for this book is, so how am I going to be able to sell it?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go down the agenting route, and for my sins, I do some consulting on the side and represent a few people. You are then, as an author, you are selling yourself twice. You have to sell yourself to your agent. Why am I marketable to you? Because that agent is only going to make money off of selling your book on to a publisher. It's a great clarifying mechanism in doing so, and perhaps a good exercise for people who might be choosing which route to go. And if you're pitching to an agent and they offer you to pick you up, you're under no obligations to agree to do so. You might find that you want to make another route, and it's been great exercise for you. But I also say that agents don't have magic wands, and they are also dealing with the exact same problem. They have many clients and projects for limited space within limited publishing schedules at big houses. Whereas with self-publishing, a lot of that is dissolved.
At the beginning, you talked about this. It was making me think of The Field of Dreams, the Kevin Costner movie. If you build it, they will come. And that, that's often where this premise comes from. But what I think is a really interesting point to notice from that film is that, so Kevin Costner gets this vision to build a baseball pitch in his garden. So that's got a very specific market to it. Like, it's a baseball pitch. Like, who are the people who are meant to go and buy a ticket for that. So I think that that's perhaps the thing that people miss. It's like, yes, building it is important and people will come, but you have to know what you've built. And it has to have that specific market, and then they'll be able to start to congregate. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, like the importance of really knowing who your book is written for.
Gosh, just as a quick aside, Field of Dreams, great movie based off a book called Shoeless Joe. So,
there we go.
There we go. Yeah, it's quite secular, isn't it? How to find that audience? I suppose this is, how long's a piece of string on this? There is an element of gut to this and belief on it, and that shouldn't be discounted, because there have been a lot of examples of J.K. Rowling, papered her bathroom with her rejection letters. This happens, this occurs, it does. But but outside of those exceptions, I think it's really about being aware of the market, and being in bookshops, seeing what are on tables, being online, seeing what things are running high in various lists, what people are saying about them, Goodreads, etc., how people are talking about books. And I know that's quite rawly commercial, and perhaps it feels like, it's just going to be just derivative of every other book out there. But at least it gives you an idea of the audience and where people are talking and seeing these things. And from there, you need to start to think about how I can, if you are Joe Public, Chris Wold, at my kitchen table trying to build a platform for myself, where can I start? Where can I start to find my first 50 people who will be interested in this book, and then my next 100, and then my next 500, and my 1,000, and really putting it into quite quite easily, I wouldn't, easily is the wrong word for it, but dealable segments that you can start to build your audience around it, around this idea of a book. And searching out communities online. I mean, I know that the social media landscape is a bit of a wild west, the best of times, but it does give us an insight into where people find interests, how quantities around them. It doesn't mean that you need to be building up millions of followers. In fact, there's a great theory about having the 1,000 true followers. Can you make a business out of that? 1,000 people who will buy everything or anything that you do. Can this facilitate at a scale for an individual, a business or an income or whatever it might be, on that side, which I think is really quite freeing in a way that you would never have that opportunity if you go down a traditional publishing route, because of both the royalties, the margins, the overheads that suck up all of that sort of thing. For you going individually, you would have the opportunity to make that actually a viable route. And we see this with through platforms like Substack and Medium and these various newsletters, ancillary to social media on it. But trying to find, and I know it's like trying to bottle magic, isn't it? Trying to find your audience is so hard to define, but you really have to have done some research as an individual to think there's an audience out there for my type of book, and I think I know where I can find them, and then start to do so.
And it also seems to come back to what you said right at the start about this entrepreneurial side that's really coming into someone who's choosing that self-publishing route, because you're saying it's not, you haven't just handed yourself over to the publishing company who are selling your books. You're beginning to think in that larger picture in terms of, okay, now that I'm beginning to find my audience, how might I serve them beyond the book that I'm selling them? Is it a case of, like starting a regular paid newsletter or building some sort of community space that they pay for access to? So I love how actually when you get to know your audience as you're describing it, it really puts you much more in control of perhaps other ideas that you might have of products or services that you want to sell to them.
Oh, absolutely. And this is sometimes one of those things there's quite a split between fiction and nonfiction routes to market. But with what we're talking about here, especially paid newsletters or interaction or following your market, that's not the case. What we found is that kind of exercise, sometimes for engaging with people, sharing ideas, ends up being a huge improvement on authors' writing. I mean, directly. As they see, oh, well, there's a real interest in this certain type of topic or area or theme or whatever it might be, they can then go back and apply that to the book or books that they're working on. Even outside of the marketing aspect, it's just, to the book itself. And we're talking a lot about sort of marketing audiences, finance, commercial aspects here, but at the heart of it is the book. And it's a feedback loop, all of this. And it's very, very important to not dismiss it, because it allows you access to so many more people and thoughts and ideas and responses than you could ever get in, normal daily life right now. It's one of the huge, there's really never been a time when authors have had so many ways to access readers directly. Yeah.
And that's so interesting about the comment about the feedback loop. I've had exactly that experience with my own writing. And interestingly, like I can hear, some of the people in my audience will be saying, yes, but wait, what about this urge of like, I just want to write for myself, or I just want to write the story that I want to write. In my own experience, like I've had that feeling with my own writing, but I have found that my own writing has become richer when I've begun to take some of the experiences and the desires of my audience and weave that into the text.
We're talking about books and we talk about books and products in the traditional sense, but there's no reason why you can't write what you want to write. But there's a different venue for that. Maybe that's a blog. Maybe that's your social media. Maybe that's a different outlet that perhaps will speak to an audience that you can then grow and move on to your book or audiobook or ebook that you are trying to produce and sell.
I like what you say about the social media being the platform where you can just express yourself, but then earning that right of someone then saying, well, this is great, I now want to buy your book.
Yeah, completely.
Let's talk about cover design, because that's definitely something that I've been really, really impressed with about what's going on at whitefox. And I think this is probably why self-publishing does in some cases have a bad reputation, and perhaps ties into what you said earlier about people not investing in those right editorial services. They're sort of trying to cut costs, or not having the trust to invest in themselves. I've seen a lot of self-publishing projects where perhaps maybe even the writer themselves might have designed the cover, or the cover just looks a little bit cheap, or just not that creative, or not that artistic. But the covers at whitefox, they're fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about the cover design, like how that all unfolds there.
Well, thank you for the compliment on it. And I would agree with you. I think it's pretty easy at quite a few paces to often pick out published and professionally and self-published covers, books based on cover alone. So at whitefox particularly, that's one of the areas we really do pride ourselves on it. As with all of so we're a service provision group. We're not publishers, but we handle a project through all of the processes that would happen within a publisher and pair them up with expert resources, editors, proofreaders, designers, what have you, which are the very same that are being used by Faber, HarperCollins, Bloomsbury, Random House. These are the same people. And I think that really shows there is a difference in the cost to do so. And that sometimes you can look at it by price. Yes, it's more expensive, but I think you will find also a huge difference in the process. So should you choose to say, think, oh gosh, I can go on Fiverr and get a cover knocked out for me, for a couple £100 or dollars, or even less sometimes. You very much can, but all covers are not created equal. And with whitefox, you go through a briefing process in which you're talking more about the feel, the genre, the impact you want the cover to make, where you think it's going to be sold, to whom it's going to be sold. That's the sort of quite long and onerous, some authors feel it onerous, briefing document that we put to them on it. And it goes to a designer. So they then come back with feedback and questions and maybe early thoughts on that, as opposed to you where, as an individual, on some of those other routes where you might have to start to design. You're basically designing the book for yourself, by yourself, and having somebody institute that design because they know how to use a program online and you don't. And there's a really big leap there, where I think between traditional designers and less so options, not always, but most of the time. And at the end of the day, I think it really shows. And it can become one of those pinch points where somebody says, I just saw that I can have this cover designed for $4.99 over here, and you're saying it's going to be £1,000, £1,200, and those you would have a cover from both, and every time I would go for the higher one, because why would you not want to invest in the single most impactful piece of your project in terms of its visual impact in the market?
Yeah.
It represents hundreds of hours of your work, most likely. It's sometimes the only thing that will make people stop, take a look, click on it. I think, if anything, it's probably the sort of thing that should be outsized as far as cost is concerned on it in terms of investment level. And it's really interesting to see the path that happens sometimes with this. We did I don't know if you've seen it, Gabriela, but we did a piece about an author who came to us with a pre-designed cover. It was decent. A very recent guy named Guy Hale, his book's about to publish, called Killing Me Softly, and he comes from a record production background, and looked great, but it looked like a record album. And we took it and we said, this is really interesting, but we would suggest, we worked with that artwork and a couple of other routes and moved it significantly to a book that's very genre-centric. It's sort of a dark comedy thriller, and made it really genre-specific, lots of icons, really eye-catching, and he's been just overjoyed with it to the point where he's making T-shirts, he's making stickers. They're selling this at the shows that he produces for his record company. It's wonderful, but really interesting path, because it started with something that was pretty good, but we made it so much better through the process. And I think that is, if anything, that's one of the really key things you can get from a decent investment through a service provider like that.
I remember hosting an event, and it was a traditionally published writer, and we at the end of the event, the discussion got quite informal, and somebody did raise their hand and ask her about the cover of her book, because in the informal discussion we all agreed that the cover of the book did not represent what was inside the book, and that was someone who'd been traditionally published, but she said she hated the cover of her book. So I can't imagine that someone going down the self-published route is going to be in that position. Like, sort of just say a little bit about, somebody does see the cover that's presented to them at White Fox, that White Fox are not going to say, you have to have this cover because we've bought your book. Yep. So what sort of control or independence does someone have with that cover design?
It's complete control over that. And I would say that with a sort of caveat there. So, in a traditional publishing contract, what you're talking about is, these authors who have come down that route and hate their cover and realize they don't have a cover approval clause in their contract. With ours, our process is that, of course, you will, with White Fox and I think really other good service providers, you should be getting quite unvarnished, quite sometimes difficult feedback to take on around your project. And at the end of the day, you are hearing from people who've had experience, well, certainly in our case, from inside major houses of many, many years of experience in dealing with these exact sort of issues. And we'll give it to you straight. But at the end of the day, with White Fox, if you want your cover just to have a butterfly on it and no text, you can do that. And perhaps there's reason for that. But for we would be most likely advising you about other aspects around that cover, and hopefully influence you in some way to make it the best that it can be. But end of the day, you get the call. But it wouldn't be without having heard really clearly informed feedback around what's going to make it into a more commercial project.
Sometimes that hard-hitting advice, again, with a young writer, someone who's quite new to the writing journey, they can feel more wounding to get that hard-hitting advice, but so important to be able to listen to it.
We're not mean, but we're just really straightforward about it. And I perhaps have an American bluntness to some of my feedback, which I try to take on as best I can. But I think it would also be a huge disservice for anybody who is paying for a publishing service out of their own pocket to not be hearing good advice and informed insight about something.
Yeah.
That's Fiverr. That's, I want this, you do it this way.
Yeah.
That's a whole different sort of scenario. With us, it's a back and forth, and we tell you the why, not just that you should do this, but the why of why we think this should be the way, or why you want to consider doing something in this way. And that's all the way through the editorial process as well.
Beautiful.
And that can, it's just that covers become a focal point because they're quite visual, it's discrete, it's this oblong shape on the screen, and it's also very subjective.
Sure, yeah. So let's finish, Chris, with just a few pointers for someone who's thinking about going down that self-publishing route. And what would you say are some of the important things that they need to be considering?
We've touched on a few already, but at the basis, I think there's a big question. Why do you should really be able to answer. Why do I want to publish a book? And be really honest with yourself. Is it because it's a story you feel you need to tell? Is it a commercial endeavor that you're trying to move for? Is it laying down of a history? I think it's a hard one to wrestle with, but sometimes, but is it a bit of an ego thing that I want to have a book? Be really honest. And, we won't push you on that, but I think that those areas should really be known, because they'll inform all of the other things that will then come after that. So if you're doing it for commercial reasons, you have to think about your audience, how you're going to reach them, your budget to do so, what's the P&L look like. This is all about financial aspects. If it's more about, family history, we do these sometimes. If it's a family history, is this a book that we just want to make a beautiful book in a small quantity for a limited market, or is it something I want to be available to a wider audience? Or is it an issues book? These are things that will lead you down the routes that you need to consider, and that might in how you bring it to market and why you're doing so, and all of the other sort of knock-on of investments that you might feel you need to take or not need to take, be it publicity, marketing, are you traditionally printing it? Are you POD? Is it ebook only? All of those routes on that side. And the other core one that we often, just because we've come up against it, is being really clear about what you think your comfortable budget is. There are service providers out there who will push you to take on things you don't need. We do not. We're really clear about that. But be really clear about what it is you feel you can afford to do it.
Yeah. And
a good provider should be able to tell you, we can work within that, or we can't, and you should look at XYZ option, and they should be able to give you some other options for that. Because I think that would be that's not good footing to start off with for any relationship on that. But also, I guess the last part of it before we go, if we're going, would say that this is quite time-consuming process. So you thought that the writing was hard and it was all done, and once you start the publishing process, there's still quite a path to walk down on it, and it will continue for some time. It's a long game. So just to be prepared about that, that it's not a sort of, you're not handing anything over. You're still very much, especially on self-publishing, you're very much still involved in that process for the immediate publication and beyond on that. Don't discount that.
This is great. What comes to mind is a writer I met several years ago now. I used to manage a retreat for writers, and they were talking about, you know, when you talked about the why, you know, you got to know why you're doing it, and also it's a long game. They were saying to me, like, I've got to get this book published, and they sounded really passionate, and I was like, you know, gosh, you sound really fired up about this, like what's behind that? And they're like, oh, I just want to, like, I hate it, I just want to get it out of the way so I can move on to the next project. And I was like, whoa, let's watch out in terms of the why, like, let's like you said, be really, really honest about that why. And also, yes, yeah. I sense so many writers being impatient, like they just want to get an agent or they just want to get the book out there, but to, like, unless you have that patience, there's going to be some rushing, or you're going to get frustrated that there's, you know, that it hasn't been picked up, or sales haven't picked up as quickly as possible. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that timing aspect as well.
It's double-edged, isn't it? It's great to see that kind of passion for wanting to drive something forward like that. And you can use that in very powerful ways in certain areas, but can be very destructive in others. If you're assuming that, if you're impatient about things that require a lot of investment or time to build, like your audience and your marketing, and, you know, the idea of building something from 50 to 100 to 500, it doesn't just happen.
Yes.
It's, you know, the day of the publication boosh is long gone. It's a much longer, flatter angle on your graph these days. But use that impatience to sort of focus on those little things, and be impatient to get 5 more people in LinkedIn or 10 more people on your Instagram or whatever it might be, but rather than 10,000 in the immediate term.
Yeah, it's a lovely last point. Chris, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very robust conversation. You've covered so many interesting angles, and we'll be putting details below. We'll obviously put the website at Whitefox if people want to come over there and connect with you. Is there any sort of social media connection or email connection that you want us to put down, like if people want to directly get in touch with you?
I think probably, well, for myself, I'm very happy to take any inquiries. I'm Chris at wearewhitefox.com. You can go to our website, the same address, and there is a general information sheet that you can put a question or a query to us about your project, and somebody will get back to you on it. But we're a small team. We're very intimate, so you know, we all will see it and get back quite quickly. Very happy to take all inquiries and help you or direct you as needed.
Wonderful. And yeah, we'll drop your email below as well. Thank you so much, Chris.